Imagine a small, tense room in Potsdam, Germany, July 1945. British Prime Minister Winston Churchill walks in, still grappling with a profound sense of loss. He had spent years arguing with, charming, and manipulating the man he considered his partner, former United States President Franklin Roosevelt, who had died just 3 months earlier. Instead of the familiar, charismatic figure, on the other side of the table sits a short, stiff-backed former artillery officer from Missouri, a man Churchill barely knows, and certainly does not respect, Harry S. Truman. This video is the story of that moment. The moment Churchill, the titan of empire and master of high diplomacy, utterly misjudged this plain-looking man from Missouri. He saw only a clerk, a small-town politician, accidentally dropped into a king's chair. This initial, class-based contempt led to one of the greatest miscalculations of Churchill's long political life. We will explore the clashing styles at Potsdam, the pivotal moment of the atomic bomb, and how Truman, the man Churchill dismissed, quietly went on to build the core structure of the Western world, the very structure Churchill had only dreamed of. To understand Churchill's anxiety at Potsdam, we have to look back just 3 months to April 12, 1945. That afternoon in Georgia, Franklin D. Roosevelt slumped forward in his chair and never got back up. The man who had led America through the Great Depression and almost the entirety of the war was dead. Churchill would later state he felt as if he had lost a partner in the struggle of civilization itself. The timing could not have been worse. In Europe, the Third Reich was collapsing, but had not yet surrendered. Fighting still raged, and in the Pacific, Japan showed no sign of yielding, and American planners were quietly bracing for an invasion that could cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Simultaneously across Eastern Europe, Joseph Stalin was already installing friendly governments, tightening his grip on nations like Poland and Romania, drawing those invisible lines that would soon harden into the Iron Curtain. Every leader in the Allied camp had been counting on Roosevelt, the one man who supposedly knew every file, every promise, and every secret agreement. Instead, they got Truman, a vice president Roosevelt had barely used and almost never consulted. Churchill felt the ground shift under his feet. Overnight, he had lost the one American leader he truly understood how to work with. Now he stared at a terrifying question. Could this untested former haberdasher possibly hold the alliance together at the moment it mattered most? For Churchill, the instinctive answer was a resounding and immediate no. The tension peaked on July 17th at Potsdam. Churchill's immediate negative judgment of Truman was heavily influenced by the lens of class and background. Churchill was born into a palace, educated at elite institutions like Harrow and Sandhurst, and raised to govern empires. He expected the world's leaders to be men of similar lineage and polish. Truman, by contrast, came from a Missouri farm, wore thick glasses, never finished college, and was known for failing to make a profit running a small men's clothing shop. The damning fact Churchill learned within days of Roosevelt's death. In the eyes of the British class system, this wasn't a difference of resume, it was a difference of rank. The first conversations only hardened that view. Churchill liked to talk his way into a position, circling the subject with historical analogies and quotes from Shakespeare or the classics, a ritual Roosevelt had enjoyed. Truman did not. When Churchill launched into sweeping reflections on the European balance of power, Truman would cut in with flat, almost rude questions. What exactly are you proposing? How many divisions would that require? Why should the United States commit itself to this? To the British Prime Minister, this was crude, even insulting, like being interrupted by a clerk during a carefully prepared speech. Truman, for his part, found Churchill theatrical and absurd. Where Roosevelt had seen charm, Truman saw an aging aristocrat who drank too much, talked too long, and treated Americans as a kind of giant rescue fund for the British Empire. Every demand, wrapped in eloquent language about civilization, was quietly translated by Truman. Britain wants something and expects us to pay for it. Churchill's belief that Truman was an amateur was solidified when the two men had to deal with Stalin. Before the conference officially opened, Churchill tried to arrange things the old way. He wanted a private meeting with Truman first, just the two leaders, to quickly lock in a common Anglo-American line on Poland and Eastern Europe, then present a united front to Stalin. It was a strategy of intimacy and charm that played to all of Churchill's strengths. But Truman refused. He was willing to meet, but any substantive discussions of reparations, borders, or Poland had to happen with Stalin at the table and with an official record. For Churchill, this was a shock. It meant losing the advantage of whispered understandings and gentlemen's agreements. The clash deepened in the full sessions. Churchill desperately wanted Truman to confront Stalin aggressively over Poland, to demand genuinely free elections, and to draw a dramatic line in the sand. Churchill looked to the American president to back him with the economic and military weight of the United States. But Truman's instincts were different. He distrusted Stalin, yet he had no appetite for turning the Polish question into a direct showdown that might risk another war, especially not for the sake of preserving Britain's vision of the European balance of power. He kept the language firm but cautious, probing for compromises rather than ultimatums. For Churchill, this confirmed it. The man from Missouri simply did not understand geopolitics at all. The final confirmation of Churchill's fears came not over Stalin or Poland, but over devastating new technology, the atomic bomb. During the war, British scientists and research had been folded into the Manhattan Project. On paper, London was a full partner. In practice, by the summer of 1945, the bomb was an American weapon, under the sole authority of the American president. When Truman received word at Potsdam that the first test in New Mexico was a success, he did not open a genuine debate with his British counterpart over if or how it should be used. He simply informed Churchill that the United States now possessed a decisive new weapon and intended to use it to end the war with Japan. Churchill understood perfectly what that meant. Britain had poured its brainpower into the project, hoping to preserve its status as a first-rate power. Now the decision passed entirely over London's head. Hiroshima and Nagasaki would be spared or destroyed on the say-so of a man whom Churchill still half considered a second-rate politician. Truman spoke to Churchill as a courtesy, not as an equal. The British leader could advise, but he could not veto. It was at this point, realizing how little his opinion mattered on the war's most fateful decision, that Churchill's irritation hardened into contempt. If the atomic bomb confirmed the new balance of power, the question of empire exposed a deeper ideological fault line, two completely different visions of what that power was for. Churchill had never hidden his view. The British Empire was the backbone of world order, and possessions like India were non-negotiable. Even with London bombed and the treasury drained, he imagined a future where British flags still flew globally, kept aloft with American support. Truman looked at the same map and saw something different. Raised on stories of 1776, he and his advisors believed the age of formal empires was over. If the US was to lead the post-war world, it would be as the champion of a new order, not as the junior partner of old colonial systems. When Churchill talked about policing the Mediterranean, he was thinking in imperial terms, bases and sea lanes. When Truman talked about containment and rebuilding, he was thinking in terms of sovereign states and democratic legitimacy. Churchill needed American money and prestige to prop up a cracking structure. Truman was increasingly willing to use that same American leverage, loans and aid, to push Britain toward decolonization. Churchill could live with the US rescuing Britain. He struggled with the US lecturing Britain. The more clearly he saw Truman's anti-colonial instincts, the less he saw a clumsy novice, and the more he saw a direct threat to the world he had spent his life defending. Churchill's perfect clarity about the future did nothing to restore his influence. On March 5, 1946, he traveled to Truman's own backyard, to Fulton, Missouri, to deliver a major address. This was his calculated chance to warn the United States about the new danger rising in Europe. He had watched Stalin's pattern since 1944. Non-communist leaders arrested, elections manipulated, half a continent seized. At Fulton, he gave the danger a name that would define the era. From Stettin in the Baltic to Trieste in the Adriatic, he declared, an iron curtain has descended across the continent. The speech was accurate, deliberate, and prophetic. Yet when the backlash hit, newspapers accused Churchill of warmongering and trying to drag America into a new fight to save the British Empire. Truman's White House flanked him. Despite having sat on the stage, the American president allowed his staff to emphasize that Churchill had spoken only in a personal capacity. For Churchill, it was a humiliation. He had been right about the threat, but when the moment came, Truman would not stand publicly beside him. The indispensable partner of Roosevelt was now treated like an inconvenient guest. The man Churchill dismissed did not fumble. He designed the post-war structure. Facing Soviet pressure in 1947, Truman announced the Truman Doctrine. The U.S. would support free peoples resisting communist subjugation. This was followed by the Marshall Plan, pouring billions into stabilizing Western Europe and undercutting the appeal of local communist parties. Churchill had demanded Europe be saved. Truman did it. In 1949, Truman secured NATO, a permanent peacetime alliance tying the U.S. to the defense of Europe. The exact collective security architecture Churchill had dreamed of. The shopkeeper became an architect of the New World Order, turning containment, reconstruction, and alliance into policy long before they became textbook terms. In the end, Churchill's mistake was not a failure of intelligence or a lack of experience. It was a failure of vision. A mistake about the lens he used to judge the world and the man who was inheriting it. When he looked at Harry Truman, he saw the dying world he had grown up in, one where class, schooling, accent, and lineage defined leadership. But the age that produced Churchill was over. The post-war world did not primarily reward noble titles or classical quotations. It rewarded the ability to make hard, fast decisions in a new nuclear age, to manage alliances held together by consent rather than colonial rule, and to speak convincingly about democracy to newly independent nations. On those terms, Truman, the practical, direct, and stubborn Missourian, was far better suited than Churchill could ever admit. He did not always speak beautifully, but he did what the moment required. That's the profound irony of their story. Churchill was right about Stalin, right about the Iron Curtain, and right about the danger. Yet the man who saw the threat most clearly was not the one who built the structures that contained it. Truman was. He took America's power and used it, not to prop up formal empires, but to shape a new world. Alliances instead of colonies, aid instead of tribute, influence instead of direct rule. Churchill believed Truman would fail because he was grading him on an old exam. History, however, graded them on a new one. By that final standard, it was the Missouri haberdasher who passed, and the post-war world was built in Truman's image, not his.